Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me. Um, Honestly, chapter meetings like this are the lifeblood of OWASP, and I'm so glad to see so many people come at such short notice. And so I appreciate every one of you coming. Um, it's actually snowing here in Colorado Springs, and so I can just hope that it's not any bad weather for you guys. How we make the OWASP Top 10, and in particular, how are we making the OWASP Top 10 2024, which is coming up. So let's get into it. If there's any questions, do keep them for the end. You can type into chat and I'll check chat out as well, but I won't be responding to chat during the actual presentation itself. So I don't have the world's longest presentation, so it's not death by PowerPoint. Okay, who am I? I'm Andrew Vanderstock. I have been involved with OWASP since 2001. I am the co-leader of the OWASP Top 10. We'll see our other co-leaders in a tick. I'm the executive director of the OWASP Foundation, which is the umbrella organization that hosts all of the chapters, all of the membership and things like that. If you are interested in becoming a member, do click on owasp.org and click join. It's not expensive. It's only $50 a year. There are many, many benefits, including secure flag, as well as other benefits, including access to G Suite. So definitely think about joining OWASP if you want. I used to be on the board. Luckily, my time is done, and due to term limits, I can't run again. So yay, it's a hard job, and someone's got to do it. But I've had my time. Now, I don't have a picture for Neil. Neil didn't respond in time, so I've just put a placeholder person upside down. But we've got me, Brian Glass, who's our data scientist, Neil, who's like me, is one of the primary authors, and Torsten. Torsten is our favorite German. He actually does a lot of the QA translations. He is responsible for making sure that you know, we're very precise with our language, and I'll talk about that a little bit when we get to translations. So one of the things I did when I took over the OWASP Top 10 again in 2017 is I made sure that we had a variety of leaders. Having leaders from all walks of life really makes a much better project. And that goes for chapter leadership as well. So if you are interested in getting volunteering with your local chapter, please do. So the OWASP Top 10 almost doesn't need an introduction. However, it is OWASP's major flagship project. It's not our first project. That was the OWASP Developer Guide, which is going to get a release probably sometime next year. But it is the major flagship project. It's downloaded millions of times every month. Audience is everyone, which makes it a rather difficult document to write. We need to be reasonably light on in terms of technical detail. We encourage it to be forked and made into a more complicated piece of information for specific needs. But fundamentally, the major reason for forking it is translations, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We are already planning. We met together at the DC conference, and we are going to be doing a data call, and I'll talk about how you can get involved at every stage of the OWASP Top 10. We work transparently at GitHub. When the 2024 version starts to get going, you'll notice a folder that will pop up with 2024, and you'll see us writing it, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and all of that good stuff in the open. One of the things that was a problem with previous Top 10 releases is that they just popped out fully formed, and no one knew how the data was collected or anything like that. So we've reformed the way that we actually build the Top 10, and it is designed to be explicitly open and transparent, which is some of OWASP's most treasured core values. So it's really important that we get you involved and that you can see how we're doing it. Because we don't want anyone to be surprised with the OWASP Top 10 2024 when it's released in AppSec San Francisco next year. One of the things I keep on putting into the actual OWASP Top 10 is that is not a standard. Problem is, it got the first time I ever wrote that was in 2007, and PCI put it into the PCI DSS pretty much straight away. And they didn't even ask us about what would be a better version of the OWASP Top 10 for the PCI cards industry. Because the top 10 is a list of things of not to do, not things to do. So I would imagine that, you know, if we had a chance, we would have created the OWASP proactive controls probably 5 to 6 years before time and made PCI DSS stronger if only they'd actually accepted my words that it is not a standard. However, everyone else thinks the OWASP Top 10 is a standard. So we actually did in 2021, we talked about how you can adopt the OWASP Top 10 as a lightweight standard. It is not a standard. It is too difficult to comply with. It's got very rubbery, like there are some elements of it that are very difficult to comply with. And someone's opinion about how they're complying with it can be accurate, can be correct, but not what we meant. So it's just, we're aware that people use the OWASP Top 10 as a standard, and we'll continue to make the OWASP Top 10 2024 standard-ish. And that's why we need to be precise with our language. So almost every word that is in the OWASP Top 10 is very carefully chosen. And it's one of the reasons why we need peer review, which we'll talk about as we go through to reduce the confusion about what we actually meant. Our release schedule is as follows. We try to do it every 3 years. The reality is in 2020, we tried to do a 2020 top 10, but we just didn't get any data. And obviously that's because of COVID. By 2021, we'd actually managed to get 550,000 applications worth of data. So we had enough information to go ahead and create the 2021 version. And so now it's time for the 2024 version. One of the things about standards in general is if you have a new version every 6 to 12 months, people can't adopt it. It's too frequent. It also is difficult for people in ancillary industries, those that are co-related, such as training. You can't keep on updating it. So we are very cognizant of whatever it is that will be in the 2024 version, and we don't know what that is yet. Has to last until 2027. So nothing appears in the OWASP Top 10 that we don't agree with. And everything that's in there has some justification for being in the OWASP Top 10, because we need to be able to justify it for no less than 3 years. So it's really important to understand that we don't just make this stuff up. And in fact, there's been very few OWASP Top 10s that were based around no information at all. They were just someone's opinion. The only version that might be considered like that was the 2003 version, which was the very first version. Most people aren't even aware of it. It was based around the internal statistics held at Aspect Security. Jeff Williams and Dave Wickers wrote the very first version. They did the 2004 version. I did the 2007 version. They did the 2010, 2013 versions. And then there was some controversy. And so I ended up taking it over again in 2017. So this has been a nearly 20-year journey for me. So the OWASP Top 10 is officially 20 years old now. The first version was released early in 2003. The next version is the OWASP Top 10 2004, which is the first version that most people are familiar with. was released in January of 2004. So it is officially a 20-year-old project. So where are we at the moment? We are in the process of establishing a data call. We need your data. If you have data that you are willing to share with us, please go ahead and contact us and figure out how we can help you. What we're looking for is a list of CWEs that you might be aware of. They need to be related to a number of application reviews or application scans or something like that. We'll talk about how we actually normalize the data in a future slide. But fundamentally, if you've got data and you can provide it to us, we'd love to have it. We want to beat the 550,000 applications that we had in the 2021 version. I think we can do that, and we will continue to work with a variety of different sources. We've worked with bug bounty providers, we've worked with static tool vendors, we've worked with cloud security vendors, we've worked with small boutiques, we've worked with large boutiques, we've worked with people who've got internal AppSec programs. They sometimes have more data than small boutiques. So at the end of the day, we're interested in everyone's data. We will anonymize it, so we won't be traceable back to you. And it won't be published on GitHub until it is anonymized. So don't worry about the fact that if you're going to release this information, it won't come back to you as this is the company X OWASP top 10. It doesn't work that way. We make it very difficult to figure out where the data came from. What we do is we provide the data so you can reanalyze the data and either agree or disagree with us. In April to May next year, we'll be gathering all the data that we received in whatever forms. It'll go into a database. It'll be normalized, and I'll talk about that normalization process in a tick. And then we analyze the results of that normalized data. Some of our most difficult conversations and the longest conversations that we have is in the analyze phase. Like, for example, in 2017, we had a 4.5-hour meeting just describing whether or not SQL injection was still a thing. And if it is, does it deserve to stand alone? And if it does, where does it exist in the OWASP top 10? The reality is the OWASP top 10 is the top 10 things that you shouldn't do. They're all important. And in fact, the ordering really doesn't matter very much, but for some people it really does. So knowing where SQL injection comes in seems to be important to some people. My view is that if you're not doing the entire top 10, you're missing out on your AppSec program in some description. So do it all. In May to July, we'll be writing the draft. The draft will be basically in Markdown. We do it in GitHub Markdown format. And that is roughly what you'll end up seeing when we finish doing the publication. The reason why we do it in Markdown is that it makes it easy to do translations. It also makes it easy for us to provide early access to those who need it. For example, sometimes journalists are interested in writing a story about the OWASP top 10 coming up. And at a certain point, we can say, this is roughly what the OWASP top 10 will be. And they've got time to write a decent article around the OWASP top 10, even though it's not finished, with a view to publication at the time of release. The draft itself will probably, we always start with way more text then we end up in the OWASP top 10. In the OWASP top 10 2021 version, we tried very, very hard to make sure that every page was just a page. Didn't always succeed, but it is much better than the way we used to do it inside PowerPoint. PowerPoint isn't a word processor. It is not a layout program, yet the 2010 to 2017 versions were done in PowerPoint. It is horrible to do translations in, and if there's any changes, there's no track changes in PowerPoint. So writing the draft in Markdown, uploaded to GitHub, gives you an idea who the author was, and what changes took place at what time. You'd be surprised at how often people disagree with the OWASP Top 10 and then want to find out why it was written that way. Well, because it's in GitHub and we're completely open and transparent, it is possible to work out who wrote what section. And the reality, though, is that we go through a lot of QA. We all read each other's work, and it's really important to realize that the public also reads and provides feedback on our work. So if a word appears in the OWASP Top 10, it's been read at least 4 times before we publish. So July through September, we'll be publishing betas. We'll be gathering feedback and fixing issues in QA. In the 2021 version, we had around 600 issues that we fixed. And considering the document is only around 40 pages long, that's a lot of issues to fix, but it's the way that it actually has to be. And in September of 2024, which is scarily only 9 months away, we are going to be releasing the OWASP Top 10 2024 at AppSec San Francisco. I hope to see you there. We'll be putting a talk submission in, but because it's a blind talk submission process, the reality is that we may not be accepted. I hope we're accepted, and I hope to see you there. I might use my magic executive director powers to make the talk appear, but I prefer our standard process to work. If we haven't done a good enough presentation, abstract, or talk submission, that's on us. We need to make sure that we're as good as any other talk there, rather than just simply say we're special, let us in. So anyway, we'll see. So the data call, we are looking for all CWEs. This is a change from 2017 where there was a list of around 80 CWEs. Probably should explain what a CWE is. A CWE is a common weakness or enumeration, and essentially there's about 1,300 of them. And because the OWASP Top 10 is a list of things of not to do, the categories in CWE for the OWASP Top 10 sit by themselves. So it'd be really nice for us to be able to say that we are accepting all CWEs, but please don't use CWEs that refer to the previous Top 10s, because then we become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we're talking about SQL injection, please use 79. There's an entire website that maps it. However, we're one of the very few people who ask for people to look out for logging and monitoring. We're one of the very few people who look for insecure design. Some of those things are in CWE, some of them are not. So we will accept, for example, logging and monitoring as an OWASP Top 10 category to appear in the CWEs that we get. We do try to drill down on them. When we get the data, we do a bit of sanity check just to make sure that we're not just getting garbage, because garbage in, garbage out. We don't want to have a OWASP Top 10 that's, for example, in 1 year we had a SAST vendor who gave us 40,000 records. And in the end, they only had 8 CWEs. And the amount of normalization that we had to do to that data just simply was quite excessive, because we didn't want to have that SAST vendor as being the OWASP Top 10. It just wasn't acceptable to us. So by having many, many, many sources of data from very many different types of inputs, such as static code vendors, from folks who run internal security programs, from bug bounties to security boutiques. We're looking for it all. That helps us get a balanced view of what the real risks are. We will be doing a call for data publicly within the next couple of weeks. We might wait for Christmas to die down, just simply because getting attention at this time of the year is very, very difficult. But if you have data and you wish to submit it now, we will accept it now. We're ready to go. Just let us know. Anyway, moving on. The OWASP Top 10 has always, and I mean always, had things that are been inserted into the OWASP Top 10. In 2007, I put CRSF. There wasn't much data for it, but the reality is that it was important to put it in. What we have done is change the way that we decide what gets injected into the OWASP Top 10, for which there isn't a great deal of data. We now ask the survey of the industry, and because it's on Twitter, we don't mind if the industry includes software development. In fact, we'd love to have software developers provide us information of what they feel are the most important things as well. We have about 230,000 people who follow us on Twitter. We'll be doing it on Twitter. We'll be doing it on LinkedIn. We'll be doing it on Slack. We want the survey to be answered. We generally get around 500 to 700 answers. And because it's free form, we just need to be a little bit cautious around, we want to see trends. We want to see, when we normalize that data in April and May, we need to bring it back to the top 3 to 5 to 10 things that the community wants to see in the OWASP Top 10. There is a lot of pressure from some vendors to actually put their thing in, because obviously if the OWASP Top 10 contains a thing that the vendor wants, then they can market their tool or their service as being OWASP Top 10 compliant. And that's a real win for them. We're very, very cognizant that that is a thing, and we try very, very, very hard to avoid any one vendor injecting something that will help them. It's got to be real. And the more survey results we get, the more real it is. So we only allow 1 or 2 things to be injected into any OWASP Top 10. The rest of it comes from data. Some of the ones that we injected in previous years, such as XXE, XXE was solved, so it's no longer a part of the OWASP Top 10. The other one that was there and injected, it was a bit controversial, and the first time it appeared, is logging and monitoring. That now appears by itself in the normal data. And so if you're in 2024 and you're telling me that you don't look at logs, or that logs are unimportant, you're not doing your job properly. And so it belongs in the OWASP Top 10, and I can guarantee you it's very, very likely to still be in the OWASP Top 10 2024. But initially, it was injected. So we need to reduce the time it takes for someone who's breached to when they discover it to be minimized. It used to be when you looked at the Veracode, not Veracode, it's been a while. There was a breach report, and it basically described how long it took between being first discovered, first breached and then discovered. Used to be over a quarter of a year. And it used to be that the people who were telling you that you were breached were external people. Luckily, that has changed, and I do believe it's because the OWASP Top 10 has logging and monitoring built into it now. It is difficult to pen test, but that's not the point of the OWASP Top 10. We're not a pen test standard. we are an application security standard, and that's what some people have got to realize. So we're at stage 1, gathering the data. We'll be doing an industry survey. Please look out for it and respond when you can. We'll probably be putting that out in January or February and keep it open for a month or two. We want to do early data analysis just to see where the data trends are going. Surprisingly, you won't believe this, but Neil, Torsten, Brian, and myself, we're not experts on every single topic. And so we do look into early data to see if we need to learn about some of the early trends, because if it's got a chance of being in the OWASP top 10, we need to speak authoritatively about it. And sometimes we reach out to specialists in that field. For example, when we had SSRF as an issue, I reached out to Orange Tsai, who's one of the leading researchers for SSRF. And we did that early because we knew it'd be in the OWASP top 10. Now, SSRF is still an issue. And in the end, we actually got Orange to write that section. So we are interested in contributions from specialists in a field. It's really important for us to get the details right. When we get down to it, we want to ask the question of the data. We want to basically say, what is going to be the things that are in the OWASP top 10 and how are we going to bundle them together? One of the problems that we have is that, and it has been pointed out to us, that sometimes the OWASP top 10 is actually the OWASP top 20, sorry, 43. There were 43 CWEs in the 2021 version. But we have to bundle. The reality is if we didn't bundle, the OWASP top 10 would look very different. It would look very much like the MITRE SANS top 25. What we do is we bundle them together because we're looking for things that have the same pattern, that, you know, the exploitation pattern, and the same solution, and we bundle them together. So that's why injections included SQL injection and HTML injection and JavaScript injection. We did that for a couple of reasons. One is we didn't want SQL injection to fall out of the OWASP top 10, because if it had its own section, it would have fallen out of the 2021 version. By incorporating it into everything that had the injection pattern, we were able to actually keep it. It still fell. It was no longer the top issue, but the reality is that cross-site scripting and SQL injection finally would have fallen out of the OWASP top 10 if we just kept them separate. So we need to ask questions of the data. And so Brian uses Power BI and a few other tools to actually bundle up and do an extensive analysis of the data. And we actually analyze the data analysis that is actually done. We also do normalization. Tool vendors, we actually do have tools that are assisted by humans and human-assisted tools. The difference between those two is actually very, very specific. If you actually have a CI/CD server and you're running a tool that just runs by itself, those results are not actually checked by humans. They're the lowest quality data that we get. Sometimes the false positives and the false negatives are so bad that we just normalize that data out of existence. If we can't get any sort of sense of the data being substantially correct, we don't want it to pollute the OWASP top 10. I don't know what happened there. The meeting seemed to have ended.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. So I restarted the meeting back and we were slowly getting people back.
Okay. I'll give people a few minutes to get in, but maybe I'll go through some questions.
Okay. I think the questions might have wiped out as well, but
Oh, crap. Yeah.
I do have some questions that I wrote down in a piece of paper, old school.
Okay, great.
Hey,
Do
Andrew,
you want
how's it going?
good.
Good to have you presenting for us for OWASP LA and SB. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. So you were talking about the different sources of data that you then need to massage and normalize and do all kinds of things to be able to use it. That sounds like you do a fair amount of due diligence before using the data, which of course is great. So besides the data that vendors, product vendors, other companies may provide to you, do you use any publicly available data such as, CVEs on the NVD database, things like that?
We actually do use the we use the CVE database just simply to check that what we're actually seeing in the OWASP Top 10 data set is similar to the frequency that we see in CVEs. The problem with CVEs is that it's self-reported. And so some of the things that appear more often in CVEs are because people are very specialist at like searching for cross-site scripting or SQL injection or, name your exploit. And if they're particularly, prolific, it might affect the way that we think about things. But if we're seeing a lot of exploitation of a particular issue, and we don't see that in the top 10 data, we ask the questions. Yeah, it's really important for us to get the sanity check in. And that's a really important step for us.
Yeah, all right, that sounds pretty fair.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, you don't use it directly, but more of as a point of comparison, you would say?
Yeah, exactly. We use it as a sanity check.
Okay, that sounds good. One more, if I may. I was thinking as you were mentioning that you take in all this data from, let's say, a specific company, how are you able, if at all, to account for context? And I'll give you an example to explain better what I mean. Let's say you have a small company that's providing data about vulnerabilities that they're identifying internally with their own tools. And you see specifically that in this data set, you have a lot of XSS, cross-site scripting. That may be because the data is good. There's just a lot of cross-site scripting overall, like at different companies, and this company is no exception. Or it may be because they have good tools for testing that particularly catch this type of vulnerability. Developers were made more familiar with cross-site scripting, or maybe not developers, because if they had been the developers made more familiar, then you would see less, actually, hopefully.
Yeah.
But let's say AppSec people are a lot more familiar with XSS and not other types of wounds. So that's why they find that a lot more than other types of wounds. So again, the question overall is how are you able, if at all, to account for some context in the data that you get?
So XSS is actually an interesting one, just to give you a side story, a side quest, before we go into the actual question.
All right.
We actually saw, because of the adoption of Angular and React, cross-site scripting falling down the charts very substantially, to the point that we had to bundle it. So Omri actually asked, what is bundling in this context? That means that what we do is we have a bunch of CWEs, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, LDAP injection, all the different injections. We bundle them together in one bucket, and that bucket will become, if it is statistically significant, an issue in the OWASP Top 10. So that's what I meant by the OWASP Top 10 43. We actually bundled 43 different CWEs into 10 buckets, and away we go. So the way that we develop context is that we do look at the source of data, and SAS tools are particularly notorious for producing lots and lots of results. We normalize them down a little bit so that they don't overwhelm the other data. The most reliable data that we find is actually bug bounty data, because A, it's been triaged, it's real, it's not going to be a low risk issue. They don't generally pay out for low risk issues. If you're wondering why security configuration keeps on dropping, bug bounty data has become a very core component of the data that goes into the OWASP Top 10 now. And because it's triaged, because it's been paid out, it does agree with a lot of the other data that we have. And we use it as a sanity check. So it's really, really important for us to say, is this what we're actually seeing with all of these other different forms of data? And the ones that is the most difficult for us to deal with, and the one that we actually have the least sort of trust in, is SAST input. We do struggle with that one, because there's lots and lots of results. We just don't know if it's true.
Yeah, no, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the reliability of the sources, right? Bug bounty, as you mentioned, it's been triaged. It's been triple checked by the, hopefully, at least double checked by the paying company, right? They're just not, paying just because to get them out of the way. And it's a lot more reliable than a SaaS tool, as you were mentioning, which tend to have a ton of false positives. And I doubt that a company is able to spend a ton of time doing a really good triage of or validation of each finding in a SaaS tool. There's just too much.
Yeah. And so ABC wrote, how to ensure the weight of the data is good for 3 years. The reality is that when you get 515,000 pieces of information, you need to find a bigger data set that disagrees with us.
Yeah.
You might disagree with the ordering that we have in the OWASP Top 10, and that's perfectly valid. But as I said before, if you're not doing all of the OWASP Top 10, then you're not doing it right. The XXC and deserialization, they were added, not chasing the headlines, but actually they were added because of the industry survey, and it was on everyone's mind. Now, XXC got solved because it was a simple misconfiguration error, and the main XML processors changed the default setting so that they don't process external entities. That basically meant that it fell out of the very next OWASP Top 10. But deserialization is a design pattern, and that's going to be with us until I retire. Deserialization was just simply, it's becoming ever more common. And quite frankly, I don't see it as going away. It's difficult to solve because people they want to write code like Bob Martin wants to write code, clean code. They want to have these pure functions that don't store or process data with state. And so you need to pass data around with some context. And deserialization and serialization is one of the most common ways of doing it. It's just a design pattern. And if you can inject a serialized object into an application, there's a very good chance you're going to have some fun. So it's a design flaw. It's not something that can be solved like XXE was. I honestly, the vast majority of the time, the industry survey, this is why we restrict it to 2 items. It can feel like it's chasing the headlines, but I haven't seen anything this year that would say to me that it's sticking out like a sore thumb. I mean, have you guys seen anything that would be, I mean, we're still seeing log4shell. 2019 wants its bug back. So the reality is that I don't see this year's industry survey as being chasing headlines. It's going to be a lot of different people's opinions, and we're going to have a lot of time and a lot of fun analyzing those opinions.
Looking forward to the results.
Yeah. Okay, getting back to the slides. Data science, Brian is our man. He actually does all of the really hard work. He actually presents various top 10s to us in various orders, based around his analysis. In 2021, we actually had 4 different OWASP top 10s, 3 of which looked very similar. And it was just the ordering. And so that was a long discussion that we had to say what we're going to be doing. The data science is the key element of it, but you can't do data science without having some context. So yeah. Edmund wrote, can companies provide anonymized data? It has to be real. It can be anonymized data. Work with us what that actually means. We generally do accept big buckets of data. We can tell you how we anonymize the data. So you can, if you've got a big data set that you don't want other people to work out that it came from you, work with us and we will try to get your data in. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No problems.
Yeah, I know. I work for AT&T's, and getting not anonymized data out of that would be an act of God. So that's the reason I asked.
Yeah. Okay, we've been through a lot of this, but I just wanted to talk about the difference between risks and breaches, because we often get, the Apache Commons flaw of 2017 cost one organization the better part of $250 million. And therefore it should have been, number 1 in the OWASP Top 10 2017. The reality is it doesn't work that way. It's risk times impact. Impact times likelihood. We've always been a risk-based document. Harvey asks, where do you get the data from? We get data from everywhere. We get small 1 and 2 person boutiques. We get all the way up to large SaaS vendors. We get large bug bounty firms. We were lucky enough to get both of the major bug bounty firms in 2021, which was fantastic. We hope that continues. The data comes from all over the world. We had some data submitted from Australia. We had data submitted from Japan. And so we are looking from data for everywhere. We're not just looking from the USA or the EU. Some languages are more prevalent than other languages in certain areas. And some languages are more prevalent in certain types of corporations. For example, in the top Fortune 100, C# is well represented. Whereas if you go to the general population of, financial institutions and whatnot, that C# is negligible. We need to have a variety of sources, and so we're always looking for it. So the OWASP Top 10 is never ordered by breach. The reality is that the number of people who actually go ahead and report how much a breach costs them is difficult to obtain. Even if we know that, like, for example, ransomware is one of the major problems, what one firm will pay versus what one firm won't pay, it's too difficult. So we don't do breaches. We actually look at breaches to see whether or not there's any sort of trends that we need to be aware of. But once we've actually determined what our buckets are, we work out what the impact is and what the likelihood is. We use CVSS. For that matter, CVSS 4.0 just got announced. So yay, we'll be using that. So writing the draft, basically this is the longest part for me and Neil, and Torsten. Torsten has to deal with our English. It's always fun when a non-native speaker deals with your written language better than you can. The reality is that we write articles for about 15 or 16 of these things, and only 10 of them make it in, and then we will actually edit down into like an additional section, just paragraphs without the full analysis for the ones that didn't quite make it. So don't take the order of the OWASP Top 10 nor what's in the OWASP Top 10 2024 until we get to pretty much near release date. We've actually had some reordering done, weeks out from release. We write down what it is, how to prevent it, and references. We try to write how to prevent it in a most generic form. The problem with that is that how to prevent it in Node.js is very different to how to prevent it in C# and very different to Java. We need to be aware of those different use cases. And so what we do is we provide references into articles and blog entries and things like that that allow us to actually say, if you need to solve this for a particular platform, you can actually go ahead and find that information out. One of the major ways that you can help us is peer review. Grab the copy when we come out. Read it. Try to understand what we're trying to tell you and say, that doesn't make any sense, or this could be better written, or that's a bit vague. One of the problems with writing documents that are for everyone is that we need to write in a non-technical way about highly technical things. And you can lose a lot of context doing that, but we need to explain ourselves in a way that allows someone to say, for example, they're looking at serialization, deserialization, and we're just saying, don't send that data to the user. Well, that's something you can say to everybody. And you don't have to have specific examples in Node or specific examples in Java. It's really just important that we actually write it in a way that can be interpreted by everybody, no matter what language, what framework, what they actually use day to day. It's very important for us because it also helps with translations. If the English can be misinterpreted, it's very likely to be mistranslated. And so we work with translators early on to actually go through the language to make sure that they understand what we're trying to say. And if they're confused, that means that the language that we've used in English is wrong. And we need to write it and become more succinct or more clear about what we actually meant. Because that will then generate a good translation. And because I don't read, I have a passing ability to read French, but I don't read German. I don't read Spanish. I don't read Japanese. I'm not going to be able to check the translations that we get. And so we do rely upon the community to help us with translations. And so it's very important for us to make sure that when we write things down, we're not doing it in such a complicated way that the translation, it gets it wrong. Always help us out with spelling, grammar, meaning, and translations. Just give us a pull request or an issue at GitHub and just simply say, you misspelled this word. We do write in American English. We probably won't produce a Great Britain English version of the OWASP Top 10. So if you see analyze, it'll have a Z. But we don't mind having, for example, a Brazilian Portuguese and a Portuguese version of the OWASP Top 10, because if it helps people get past the understanding, it will be very, very good for us. So we don't mind getting more translations than less translations. We are targeting Global AppSec San Francisco 2024. We will start translations a few weeks beforehand. We like to have Japanese, Spanish, German, and a few other common languages before we really go live. But some of the most useful translations are those that are not spoken very widely outside the, for example, folks in South Korea and Vietnam, they don't speak English as often as we speak Vietnamese or Korean. And so having a translation for them is actually very, very important. And so we do work with people to provide translations for some of these lesser known languages, just simply because the amount of English spoken in those industries, in those countries, is very minimal. And OWASP mission is to provide this information to everybody. We also try to reach out to the press. We do interviews. If you do know any media, very happy to talk to them. So at this very moment, we are looking for data. If you have data, please contact us at OWASP Top-10, which is the account at Twitter versus, I think it's called X these days. Help us with the survey details and questionnaires. Help us with analyzing the data. You can, like, if you're a specialist in a particular area, like Oriented to Sci is for SSRF, feel free to help us write that section that we get right. We want to be right. We don't want to basically say only Neil, Andrew, Brian, and Torsten can write the OWASP Top-10. That's not the way it works. We are a community. You know, we might lead it, but the reality is that we need your help. Provide feedback, peer review, QA, PRs, always welcome PRs. Translations. Yeah, we actually do target. The question from Harvey is, when addressing C-level similar management, you should write as if your audience is an 8th grade classroom. We actually do use simplified English. We don't go for complicated words or words that actually have multiple meanings. We try to have simpler sentences that don't run on. It's really important for us to actually, make it as easy as possible for people to translate our work, but also for English speakers and those who don't speak English, they speak English as a second language, to be able to read what we're actually written. Okay, there was one other question above here. We're in the questions section. I'm happy to take questions from the floor now as well. Most of the information comes from cloud implementations. Yeah, so we are seeing a number of sources from cloud providers. It's very difficult for us to check if that data is correct. So if we do rely upon checking sources against other sources just to make sure it makes sense. We had one vendor who, I think I mentioned this before, they submitted a whole bunch of CWEs, but it turned out there were just 8 CWEs that were unique. It's interesting to see how those cloud vendors work, but we're very happy to receive their data, but we will be comparing it against other data sets. Yes. Okay, any questions?
I think there may have been one other question above that one. We have a new question from Alejandro.
Yep.
He's asking about just the repo.
Yeah, so that repo is the correct repo. There are other Top-10 repos out there, but that's ours. It's forked a lot, so feel free to work inside that repo. We haven't actually committed anything yet for 2024, but we will do so as soon as the we do the call for data. Edmund, you mentioned, would we consider EPSS? I'm not familiar with EPSS, so I might follow up with you after the meeting and just sort of say, what is EPSS?
Okay.
One other comment I wanted to add, A little earlier, Andrew, you were mentioning about having specific resources, like links or names to specific resources where people could see how to address a type of vulnerability on a specific context or for a specific language. And the first thing that came to mind, which I'm not sure you mentioned it or not, is the cheat sheet series, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of really good content there.
Yeah, absolutely. We use that and we use OpenCRE.
The new project, yeah, I'm familiar with it. I've been talking to this guy. What's his name?
I would,
From London. I think he's leading the project.
yeah.
I can't recall his name right now, but we've been chatting a little bit about it. So yeah, even just for the rest of the people to know, there's a lot of OWASP's own documentation that's referenced right in the top 10.
Sure is. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I posted the first.org EPSS link in there for everyone to see also. It's sort of a new way of looking at the data that CVSS is also analyzing.
Yeah. I do hope that they've got cross-site scripting correct this time. They used to have, like when CVSS 2.0 was around, the equivalent of a CVSS 10.0 for bug overflows, like buffer overflows, was like 4.3. I know it went up in CVSS 3, but I'm very interested to see what stored cross-site scripting turns out to be for CVSS for 4.0. Obviously, there's a level of authentication that is in many apps that mean it won't be a 10.0, and I'm quite happy to accept a lower number, but it can't be 4.3.
So I just remembered this other guy's name, Spiros Kaskaratos, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, Spiros is great.
Yeah, we've been chatting a lot.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us and presenting on this. At least for me, it was really valuable to see how much effort goes into creating the top 10 and why it's done every 3 years. And so appreciate that. And hopefully everybody got a value out of this. Apologies for the interruption in the middle. I don't know what happened, but we're going to piece them together and post them on the YouTube and announce where it is exactly, but check the OWASP LA website for YouTube and you'll see the recording there in a few days. Thanks again. Happy holidays to everyone, and we'll see you on January.
Yeah, I also wanted to highlight that we have some people attending from South America. I published this in a group that I have in Argentina. So we have Alejandro from Colombia, we have Ana and Walter from Argentina. So wow. pretty nice attendance from all over the world.
Welcome, absolutely. Great to have the community get together virtually. So we might do more of these virtual meetings in the future.
Excellent. Love it.
Have a good rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, Andrew. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.